Alan Kirkaldy, recently retired from Rhodes University in Makhanda, was awarded the prestigious Vice-Chancellor's Book Award at the 2025 graduation ceremony for his work called Everyday Communists in South Africa's Liberation Struggle, The Lives of Ivan and Lesley Schermbrucker. On Wednesday, 14 May 2025, he gave a public lecture on the book and how it came about. I attended, and I'll send him a few questions as a result. Alan is joining me online now. Alan, congratulations.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's good to have you here. I just want to ask you something. At the lecture, you said, and I'm going to quote, "If I could choose an award, this is the one that I would always have liked to have gotten, because to me, it's, well, as I said, the most prestigious and kind of what we as academics are about." Unquote. Please explain.
There are a number of Vice-Chancellors awards at Rhodes. There's a teaching award. In fact, there's two teaching awards. There's one for a junior, it works on your experience, and one for a more senior person. There's a research award, and there's a community service award, and there's a book award. And I was nominated once for the teaching award, and in fact, the person who won it was in the audience and joked with me afterwards about that comment of mine. And she said, "What about my award?" And I kind of said, "Well, you won it away from me. So we are friends." Yeah. But you know, the book, for me, kind of, yes, academics is about teaching, research, community service. But if you think of academia, your most lasting contribution is anything you've written. I also, when I was a student, I still remember friends of mine who were going into all exciting careers, some of whom had studied history with me, but others doing different things, said, "Well, why do you want to become an academic?" And I said, "Because I want to write books." And, for me, the two are synonymous. So, yeah, I've managed to write a couple of books. So I've kind of achieved what I set out to achieve.
Because one of the interesting things you've just mentioned at the lecture, you specifically said that biographies were not cool in communist circles. You actually wrote a 400-page biography. How do you hold those two?
Yeah, I shocked myself.
Yes. How do you hold these two things in tension?
Look, Marxism has gone through various emanations. I kind of, when I moved out of my office, I threw a whole lot of my early writing out. And obviously, while I was sorting it, to throw and what to keep, I kind of looked through some of the stuff. And when I saw all this stuff on fractions of capital, and I thought, hell, did I used to write that crap? It was just so kind of deterministic. But so Marxism moved away from that, and it kind of gave birth to schools like, history from below, social history, microhistory, history of ideas, those kind of things, where, we would have said in the beginning, history is driven by the class struggle. As Grandpa Marx said, the whole of human history is the history of class struggles. But so individuals don't really feature in that. Yeah, in the Soviet Union, they used to produce hagiographies of whoever was flavor of the month. But kind of, you wrote about social processes. But individuals are much more interesting than social processes. And individuals can tell you about the wider society as well. So it's not the one thing, and I'm quite glad that Palgrave forced me to do this. I kind of took a lot for granted when I wrote the book. I didn't situate, I didn't situate it in the whole national and international politics of the period, because I kind of thought, but everyone knows this. And Palgrave said they don't. You have to tell them. your book is going to be read by people who've never heard of South African history. So tell them what these. So in fact, it's a biography. It's a dual biography, but it's also not. It's also an analysis of the times. So there's pages and pages of kind of stuff on the treason trial, the Women's March, racist legislation. Unfortunately, there is a length limit. There was a lot more on kind of social things like cinema and mimes and all sorts of, and restaurants and all sorts of, which had to be cut out because the book was sort of turning into this kind of mountain.
Into a tomb. I mean, it's already, it still is 400 pages long. Would you say though that this is a micro lens through which we're looking at history now, a micro story?
Yeah, and what's quite nice is Ivan was born in 1921. Lesley's 99 this year, so was she born in 1924? I should have checked before the interview. I'm a historian who's useless with dates, by the way. So their history also parallels their history of the Communist Party. For me, it's very interesting. And sorry, my mind's jumping ahead to an email I received yesterday, which I'll come back to. Just remind me, there's an email you want to come back to.
I also want to ask about the history of the Communist Party, but just on a much more personal note. To mine, you mentioned now that Lesley is 99 years old, which would mean that she would be born in 26, not 24, of course.
Right, thank you.
And the couple's daughter did attend the lecture, and their daughter-in-law too. Now, you started the lecture by going completely off script, and you held up what looked like a leather bag. Please explain to us the significance of that bag.
I actually have the bag with me over here. It's not leather, it's actually cloth.
Okay. I couldn't see from the back.
It looks from a distance, it looks like leather because of its coloring.
Okay.
But you can see it's got kind of flowers and things.
Okay. Yeah.
Lesley spent 2 years in prison. At least 300 days of that was in solitary confinement in Daisy de Melker's cell. Wow. She then moved to Barberton from Pretoria Central and moved to the one that's in the fort. Yeah. She moved the fort. Sorry. Yes. She then moved to Barberton. While she was there, she had the company of rats, and she's scared of rats, which would climb under the door. And obviously, I mean, having been there myself, kind of isolation is the worst thing that can happen to you, even if you're not gregarious. It's and so what she kind of, you obviously have, they have to feed you and things, so you see faces every now and then besides those who are interrogating you, and the matron took pity on her and gave her material and thread so she could sew. I mean, it was all against prison regulation, but she made this bag when she was there. She also made jerseys, which her grandsons ended up wearing. But there's a whole kind of thing that she made, glove puppets and all sorts of things. And she reckons that was what kept her sane. That, and also she was allowed to study through UNISA. So basically the bag was made in solitary in Daisy de Melker's cell, yes. And I noticed in the book, I was reading something to check something, and she says, and I made the bag and I still have it. Well, she doesn't have it anymore because she's given it to me. Yeah.
So that now is the bag that you've been given on the night of the lecture.
Yeah.
So the Schermbruckers were clearly willing to give information and help you on researching this book. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, it was actually, it's potentially disastrous when you get access to a family archive. it better remain anonymous who they are. But I mean, there's a prominent family in the Eastern Cape that I would have liked to have worked on their family history. But I went and spoke to them, and I could see that they were going to try and determine every word that I wrote. And, you know, I can't work like that. So the Schermbruckers made everything they had available to me. They introduced me to all of their friends that were active with them, those that were still in the country, and even some overseas. So eventually I used the family archive and kind of snowballing, interviewing friends, and then people overseas who we spoke either by email or we did Zoom interviews and things. So they never once asked to see what I was writing.
That's
I would have
amazing.
said no but you know, if it was pushed, I would have abandoned the project.
But they must have read it since.
Yeah, no, they when it became a final book, they read it.
Okay.
They did appear. I presented kind of when it was about halfway through. I presented at Stellenbosch, and the whole Schermbrucker extended family sat in a row, kind of looking at me, with Lesley, who was more mobile, kind of glaring at me, but she enjoyed the lecture. And they popped up on Lesley. Kind of, she doesn't have her own Zoom, so she pops up on other people's Zooms. So you're never quite sure when she's there or not. Now I'm afraid she's not there because she's very frail now.
Okay.
What's amazing is she ran an exercise business for her entire working life.
She was the South African Jane Fonda, wasn't she?
Yes, yeah. And on her 90th birthday, I went body surfing with her.
Nice. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So she was in, as far as I know, because I haven't seen her since COVID. As far as I know she can't walk anymore without assistance. But she says she can still stand on her head, and I believe her, because she used to do yoga before it became fashionable for Westerners to do yoga. She was exposed to yoga and has done yoga and exercise all her life. And I mean, she had some of the same clients through that whole period. And I said, well, what do you do with these kind of now very old ladies? And she said, well, I put things like a tin of beans on the floor and they have to bend to pick it up. It keeps their mobility. She was forced to be inactive during COVID, and that was kind of where her physical decline, there's no mental decline, but her physical decline kind of set in.
But she used this, I mean, she famously, according to the book, she famously used to say that she planned the struggle from the toilets of John Dawes. So
John Oars, yes.
John Oars, sorry, John Oars, my apologies. Sorry, yes, John Oars. Which, of course, for those who don't know, it was kind of like the Woolies of those days. It was kind of like a good, fashionable place to be seen and shop. And had tea rooms and all of those things. We don't have John Oars anymore. But in other words, they basically used their pretty much middle-class upbringing to help fund the struggle. Do you want to talk about that for a moment? Because that actually is kind of what piqued your interest. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, that's what really piqued my interest. You know, there's more than enough history of the icons of the struggle. And I'm not dissing any of them when I say this, but Mandela, Tambo, Joe Slovo.
Well, they were friends. Fisher. They were friends with Slovo. They were friends with Fisher. They actually helped Fisher at some point when he was in deep trouble. Ivan and Lesley were the people who helped him. But somehow you focused on Ivan and Lesley. So please tell us about them.
Yeah, well, you know, there were these kind of struggle heroes who were out there. But then there were these two people who were making it possible financially for them to be out there. Ivan, through his management of the Guardian newspaper, And Lesley, through her exercise, Ivan didn't get paid much, if anything, for working on The Guardian. So Leslie's exercise business was what kept him going. Unfortunately, she's forbidden me to say, well, she forbade me in the past to say who were members of the exercise group.
Okay.
But your eyes would go big and round if you.
Okay. Yeah.
They weren't necessarily socialists that were kind of participants in the exercise groups.
Well, one of the other quotes that I remember from your lecture was that it was struggle from Monday morning until Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon until Sunday afternoon was party time. Would you like to elucidate on that?
Yeah, well, they kind of, so Ivan ran The Guardian. He moved around the whole country with Mac Maharaj and others, collecting money from small business people. Guardian subscriptions were a wonderful way of hiding money coming, because you just say, well, we're getting subscriptions to the newspaper. So people would subscribe to the newspaper, but they would also give money. Or in the case of Madame Raymond, she would give her orange crop to be sold to. So he'd move around collecting money. She'd funnel people out of the country and move people in hiding around and things, all behind this veneer of middle-class respectability. And sorry, what was your question again?
No, that's exactly it. I mean, here were these two, you call them everyday communists, everyday people, white, middle class, seemingly respectable, seemingly not part of anything untoward. And here they were actually actively smuggling, well, activists out of the country, helping them when they were in trouble. And of course, obviously, both of them ended up in jail. But it actually is an extraordinary story about two very ordinary people.
Yeah. And for me, their ordinariness is what sets them apart. And I mean, yes, they both ended up on the Politburo, the Central Committee, but so in fact, some reviewers have challenged my calling of them as very ordinary or everyday, because they said, but they were on the Politburo. But nobody outside the Politburo knew they were. Yeah.
I want to ask something. In the Western Cape and parts of the Eastern Cape, the unity movement was very big, the non-European unity movement.
Yeah.
They were Trotskyian. And I actually happen to know quite a lot of people who were part of that. They were pretty much against the SACP because in some ways old father Stalin hovered around in the USSR at some point, but they certainly were Trotskyian. A lot of those people, although I know white people who were part of that as well, but they were people from various races. The question that I want to get to is actually getting back to the white middle classness of these two people. When Joe Slovo came back into the country, a lot of people were actually quite surprised to see that he was white. I mean, he has a struggle here with white. Do you think that the SACP in some ways found it easier to attract white people than some of the other struggle movements, or is that just my suspicion?
I feel disloyal in saying this, but if you look at the early years of the Communist Party, they were very white.
I know, but they were actually racist.
I'm not outing any great.
But they were actually racist at that time.
Workers unite for a white South Africa.
For a white South Africa. No, but that's the early part. I mean, we're talking about slightly later now. Yeah.
I think the thing is that ethos. I would argue that the Communist Party was the only truly non-racial party at the time.
Okay.
And there were various policy changes, but it wasn't just policy. The leadership actually believed in it to create a kind of national struggle. So it wasn't the kind of necessarily the vanguard working class leading and taking over the show, big socialist revolution. It was binding together with African nationalism and other struggles within the country. And to me, in the beginning, the ANC, you had to be black to join. It was the only truly non-racial party at the time, I think. And they developed closer links. I mean, I was very amused when there was all that discussion about, was Walter Sisulu a communist? I don't know if you remember, there was a big debate. Yes, he was. Ivan recruited him into the communist party.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I mean, he would have probably become one anyway. And even Mandela, who could be very anti-communist, was...
No, he certainly was in the end, yes.
Yes.
There was this tension. As I say, what is interesting is I think we need to do more about the unity movement, but that's my bugbear at the moment because it's something that I'm actively reading about. But it is interesting to see how the Communist Party was kind of an amalgam behind, and until very recently was part of this whole thing. But at the same time, I want to quote from the university when they awarded you. Sabrina Zarf wrote, Alan Kirkaldy's award-winning book invites reflection on more than reaction. It expands the definition of what counts as heroic in the freedom struggle. It asks, what does resistance look like when no one is watching? Unquote. Is that not an absolutely wonderful way of summarizing Ivan and Lesley's lives?
Yes, that's a perfect way of summarizing. I wish I had thought of that. Takes a journalist to think of things like that. But yeah, no, it is. It's kind of, that's why the title Every Day. It was originally called Very Ordinary Communists. And then my partner Tessa said to me, but are they very ordinary? So we talked to me, and she said, well, what about everyday communists, which has the implication of ordinary, but it also means it's something that's part of your life that you do every day. And that to me made sense. And for me, that's the real heroism. Is if anyone that reads the book, you'll see that there's extensive footnotes, and there would have been even more. But Palgrave, obviously they have to. Publishers have to make money on your book. So they're not going to produce sort of 4,000 pages. If it's in Germany, they may. They sometimes produce very long books.
Karl Marx certainly wrote very lengthy sentences.
Yes, yeah.
But anyway, that's probably one of the reasons why it's not read as often as it should be. But
yes.
That's a different story altogether.
But so the ordinary, there's copious descriptions in there. They're in fact endnotes rather than footnotes. And because the book is sold online as well, and you can buy single chapters, they endnotes at the end of each chapter, which is a thing I found quite strange, but I mean, it looks fine. I'm happy with the way it turned out. I kind of give biographies, obviously I can't go on for pages, but kind of half a page on people that have had no biography written of them and never will have a biography, or maybe will. But, there's all these people that were the true heroes. I'm not discounting the role of the icons, but, icons can dance around and perform. They need people to support them. It's the people that do the work. Ivan and Lesley were raising the money that made it possible. Others were making the bombs, Others were building the stage for the Kliptown Freedom Charter. They're all equally important.
Well, I mean, you actually mentioned that during the lecture. I mean, we all know about the Kliptown Freedom Charter. That was also the bedrock of our present-day constitution. But somebody actually built that stage, hammer and nails, and sat there building it. And you mentioned that in your book.
And went to jail for 15 years afterwards because he was doing things with bombs as well.
Yes. Yeah.
He didn't only build stages.
No, not at all. Just one of the things that tickled me was Ivan spoke Deep Xhosa because he grew up on the trading post. Lesley spoke Deep Zulu because she grew up in the trading post. So here we have these two kids from traders who ended up being kind of everyday people, getting money from everyday people, funding a struggle. How did they get into communism? Can you briefly explain that to us?
Yeah, the important thing to realize is speaking a language doesn't mean that you sympathize with the speakers of that language. I mean, I was horrified. One of the most ardent racists that I've ever met speaks fluent Tsonga Shanga, grew up on a mission station and speaks, but they're intensely racist. Obviously, they're going to remain anonymous. Yeah, but so they grew up as the children of traders, playing with black kids. So did many other people who went on to become nationalists or, moved out of the country, but certainly didn't become communist agitators. So Lesley puts it down to Lesley's family was particularly poor. Lesley says basically, with hindsight, they were poor whites. Although he was a trader, then he started a sugar farm, but he was freak useless at sugar farming. But so they were really poor. Ivan's family was a bit better off financially, but they also weren't rich. They kind of associated, the only kids around for them to play with were black kids until they went to school. And that was the case for many other people. But, some people go in another direction. I don't know if you know Russell Kashula, who used to be at Rhodes.
Yes.
Yeah, he had a similar upbringing. isiXhosa was, in fact, his first language. And he didn't become a communist agitator, but he became the head of the isiXhosa department at Rhodes University. He's now moved on to UWC and a Saatchi chair. Some people kind of reject their background, other people absorb, and they always had a sympathy and an understanding, and the fact that there was also an idiom. They didn't speak kind of bar servant, isiXhosa or isiZulu. So it was a way of communicating. One of the blind reviewers, peer reviewers, said I needed to make more of the language. And I made as much as I could of it, and would have loved to have made, but how do you recover it? There's no documents talking about that. And people have forgotten when you try and interview, people will say, yes, he spoke very good isiXhosa, or she spoke very good isiZulu. But by the way, like Ivan's brother was a policeman.
Okay.
Same background.
Yes.
Although he became a policeman because he loved horses.
Okay.
So he joined the what's it called?
Yes, equestrian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's like Breitenbach and his brother.
They had something. They had a feeling, first of all, and an understanding and a kind of, I don't mean sympathy in the sense of shame. I mean, a sympathy in the sense of this is how we grew up. I mean, they unfortunately, Ivan died before I could interview him, but I interviewed Lesley a lot, and she talked about her and Ivan because he had told her, going and eating maize meal kind of in rural Transkei or Zululand, or mixing with people, kind of sipping beer, and they took that for Ivan. He was also at Mthatha High, and I recovered quite a lot of stuff about the fact that there were very lively debates. Because this was the time of kind of, we were getting into the rise of Hitler and things. So and Afrikaner nationalism was growing. So there were debates at the school, and he chose the kind of leftist side of those debates. He then went to the army, and for a lot of people, the army and the Second World War were kind of conversions for communism, socialism, and that's what happened with him. He was stationed in Egypt and in Italy. In Italy, he became a full-on card-carrying communist. He joined the Springbok Legion. He joined the Friends of the Soviet Union. He's really he's really fascinating from that point of view because he wasn't a Stalinist. He was deeply opposed to Stalin at a time where arguably Bram Fischer was his closest friend, and Bram was a Stalinist. But Ivan, in a letter I came across to a friend, said, I think secretly I may be a trot.
Okay.
But that's that would have been expulsion. But
of course,
he always kept peace, between different factions, and managed to negotiate that.
Neville Alexander was a Trotskyian. I mean, he was quite anti-Stalin. Interesting. But as I say, that again is a very interesting parallel that should be discussed at some point, not now. You mentioned earlier about an email that you have received. Was that something that you want to talk about now?
Yeah. Okay. It fits in very well at this point. It kind of, you took us to where it makes the most sense to discuss it. In fact, it's about kind of relationships in prison, and one of the people imprisoned together with Ivan and Bram and the other political prisoners at the time was called in by Bram and forbidden to communicate with Rodi Arenstein, because of the fact that he wasn't a communist. And there was this whole division between various factions, which kind of, if you've all been sentenced to prison or detained, but in this case sentenced for anti-apartheid activities, you have the same goal, you using the same methods. I mean, the African resistance movement used bombs as well. Maybe they didn't blow up people, but there was. So you've got the same end goal. You're there as prisoners. Your morale is at its lowest ebb. Ivan spent a lot of time trying to unite people. I don't know how he managed it with being such a close friend of Brahms, because Brahm kind of, I'm sorry to say, Brahm is kind of Saint Brahm in the hagiography of the Communist Party. I read somewhere, and it's a very good description of it. People write about him as if he was a cuddly pussycat. He was in fact a tiger with long claws. He could do the pussycat, but he could do the tiger as well. And there were these kind of deep divisions, and rereading my book brought these all to the fore for this guy again. And he kind of wrote to me and said, I need to talk about this. It's it was kind of ideology sowing divisions where ideology should have been put aside in the sense of, and used to build unity. You're in prison for anything from 2 to 15 years, or in Brahm's case for life, but you're in prison for significant periods. For God's sake, get on. And it brought it home to me because he was kind of deeply moved by thinking about this again. He said he kind of felt like he was back there again dealing with these things.
So you obviously know Ivan well.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you something else. Recently, I was at a book launch on the life of Neville Alexander, and one of the questions from the audience, actually, interestingly enough, not from the panel, was, why is it that we remember the men in the struggle, but the women who were sent to prison are actually forgotten?
Yes.
You're an historian of queer history as well. Are women still the marginalized in the struggle?
Sipukazi Makhanda has brought out a book on women in the struggle. Women are acknowledged, but not as much as they should be. I said when I was giving the lecture that I was asked by Ben Schermbrucker, do you know anything about my grandfather? His grandmother was equally significant.
Yes.
But she kind of headed more. He headed. He wasn't like all over. It's actually, I don't know how he managed to hide it. Because by all accounts, I mean, people that were in prison with him describe him as kind of walking around prison as if he owned the place. And with this kind of, I am Ivan fucking Schermbrucker, don't mess with me. It's so how he managed to keep his activity secret for so long, I have no idea. But Lesley was kind of equally important. I mean, they relied on each other. And women are largely forgotten about. And I mean, if we look at Winnie, she's a controversial person in South African history. The kind of pressures she was facing, not only as an activist and guerrilla, but as a woman in the struggle, were immense. One can understand why she may have cracked. Yes.
I do want to ask.
And women are still larger. There's every now and then they come out, but it's the kind of big boys who get mentioned.
I do want to ask one final question because it's a fascinating interview, Alan. But one of the things that Ivan did was he, as you've mentioned it, he went around the country collecting money. Where did he get this money from? From what I could understand, these were actually also everyday, rather ordinary people.
They were shopkeepers. They were shopkeepers. They were small businesses. They were. I mean, without racializing it, one of his big markets was kind of Indian shopkeepers. Towns would have those sort of local Indian shop, and they were the people. And there were kind of all kinds of people who were selling. And then there was Madame Raymond, who needs a book written about her. I don't know how. I struggled even to write her a half-page biography in the notes to the chapter, because we just don't know anything about her. But he kind of was this larger than life character. Ivan was exceptionally foul-mouthed. Ruth first once described him as the most foul-mouthed person in the struggle. I identify with that. But Madame Raymond was equally foul-mouthed and kind of completely overdramatic, and kind of could come out with statements that I'd probably get hit under various defamation laws if I mentioned them here. And it was her who donated her entire orange crop to fund the struggle. So there were people like this. Ivan was also very good at finding out people who had money. And then he'd secretly hit them for money. He spent a lot of time kind of reading about people in the newspapers, and he had a very good idea of kind of how money worked in South Africa. And he knew who to target. And he would target kind of even well-established establishment figures. And, their motivation might not always have been the purest, but they gave the money.
So capitalism drove the Marxist agenda in South Africa.
Well, Shane, the crazy thing is that when he came out of prison, he was banned, as usually happened with political prisoners, he couldn't get a job. He ended up working for consolidated share registers. Izak de Vries, who subsequently was it the PFP then? Was it the DR? I can't remember which stage in its history
one
it
of
was.
those, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
but
yeah.
Izak de Vries got him the job, and they're an Anglo-American company.
Yes. Yeah.
So Anglo-American were kind of paying. It's the only time he earned any real money.
Okay.
This kind of die-in-the-wool communist.
Yeah.
And they knew about it. They had to have known about it, you know.
Yes, yes. I do want to take a step back, though. I've read your master's dissertation and the book that followed on your PhD. The master's was about the Kalk Bay fishing community and the effects of apartheid on them. And the second, in other words, your PhD, the publication following on that, your PhD was about German missionaries in Venda. You also taught queer history. So basically, you know, before you took on writing this book called Everyday Communists, I know that you did study the South African Communist Party as well. So basically, can you give us a brief overview of your research interests as an academic? You're now a professor emeritus, but I mean, for many years, you were an active teacher and researcher, and you're still researching.
Yeah,
so what are your research interests?
All of those fields, actually, funny enough. I kind of, I like working in an area that I'm in. So, you know, when I was in Cape Town, Kalk Bay was a nice topic. When I was at University of Venda was the other. Coming down here, well, the Communist Party is a kind of theme running right through. So the Masters was written at a time where the fishermen of Kalk Bay were under threat of eviction because of the Group Areas Act. There was a limited period left. They were originally given 15 years to stay where they were. That 15 years was running out. And I've always believed that, I used to say, I say it less dramatically nowadays, but I used to say history is a weapon of struggle. Whenever I taught, certainly when I was teaching at Venda, but even when I came down here, the struggle changes. But for me, the task of historians is, well, you can either choose to help change society, or you can try and change society. And I fall more on the latter thing, but I'm not dissing anyone that kind of writes stuff that inspires others. But I've always, I was involved in the underground liberation struggle. And so for me, history is just one weapon that you use in struggle, because you can use it to expose lies. I was taught when I was doing sociology undergraduate that sociology is a crap detector. History is also a crap detector. And it gives you powerful tools to challenge what's going on. Most important, it teaches you how to build arguments. But I know some of my colleagues disagree. I believe historians should be on the barricades. Okay. Some say, no, we should assist those on the barricades, but I think you should be on the barricades if you're.
Well, you were on the barricades. You were incarcerated during the apartheid cycle.
Yeah. So that's why the Kalk Bay one had a political purpose. It was to show this is a community which has roots running way back into the pre-colonial period. I mean, it's even early human history. There were hunter-gatherers living there. So, you want to disrupt this community because of wider changes that didn't become a reality, because the Group Areas Act was scrapped. And then we bring in my Marxism, because although the group areas have been scrapped, the fisher folk don't have the economic might to challenge the development of Kalk Bay as a kind of tourist resort, which has been a problem since the 1800s, by the way. Fishing is not very twee, it smells, and so you try and keep them away from the tourists. And the South African waters are overfished, and there's a whole reason why it's not. they're never going to make a wonderful living out of fishing there anymore. Then I went to Venda, and at the time that I got to Venda, it was a period where there was witch burnings going on as part of the liberation struggle. I mean, the best quote was that when I was in, because I wrote on this, when I was interviewing a student, he said, we need to clear the country of impimpis and witches to prepare the way for liberation. I mean, I've got a whole argument about why witches, but that's maybe not relevant to this interview today. But so when I was interviewing people about witchcraft beliefs, I kind of kept on being told, this is our tradition, this is our tradition. We always done these things, which, if you're a historian, kind of raises all sorts of hackles, because, there's a famous book called The Invention of Tradition. Historians believe that traditions are invented. So I thought, well, I've got to try and find 19th century or even earlier. It turns out I couldn't find earlier. But I've got to find early material from the pre-colonial period that shows what people did. So I discovered through a whole chain of fortuitous circumstances that the mission archives were housed in Berlin, the archives of the Berlin mission, and that I invited a professor from there to a conference I gave with no ulterior motive at the time. But I was talking to him about this, and he said, well, these mission records will help you. So I kind of did a crash course in German. I don't think I've worked so hard in my life, or as I did when I went to Germany. Because academic kind of pressure in Germany is a bit more strong than it is here. So, and when I was there, I got really interested in the missionaries, not as purveyors of the gospel, but as recorders of what was happening. The missionaries wanted to kind of, to use their terms, know their enemy.
Yeah.
So they spent a lot of time trying to find out how Venda society worked. You have to approach Communist Party documents with the same critical eye. We all twist documents. If I could just say, totally irrelevantly, years ago I came across the Soviet school's history equivalent of matrics. I was kind of looking through it and saying, well, how does this reflect what I know about the history of the USSR? And Trotsky got one footnote. Trotsky was in the Red Guard.
That was it, yeah.
Yeah. So all documents are filtered through the eyes of their recorders, but that got me into, so witchcraft moved into the missionaries and what they can tell us about Venda culture. I'm now going back at the moment. I'm writing kind of two things. One is on rewilding the Eastern Cape, which I'm writing together with a former student of mine. Well, he still is a student, but he's nearly finished his master's. And the other thing is I'm going back to the witchcraft stuff.
Alan, we're talking for a long time now. It's fascinating chatting to you. Is there anything else that I have forgotten that you would like to add?
I don't think so, really. It's okay. Yeah, I think we've kind of covered most of it. Yes, yeah. Yeah, thanks very much. It's been very nice to be here. And yes, yeah.